Warning. Listening to this show may result in increased levels of inspiration, motivation, and innovation. Side effects can include the immediate urge to take massive action to build a better business and life for yourself and others. You've been warned. Welcome to Influencers Radio with your host, Jack Mize.
And welcome to another episode of Influencers Radio. You know, today, if you were to ask me to give the perfect example of the word influencer, as I had imagined when I decided to call this show Influencers Radio, it would be my guest today. For years, he was best known for his book, Endless Referrals. Over the past few years, it's his business parable, The Go-Giver, which was co-authored with John David Mann. And I will tell you, if you're an entrepreneur, sales professional, business owner, chances are it's sitting on your bookshelf or on your desk. And if it's not, it should be. But that really captured the heart and imagination of his readers. It actually shot to number 6 on the Wall Street Journal, business bestsellers in just 3 weeks after its release, and it reached number 9 on Business Week. And it's been translated into 21 languages. And it's his 4th book, actually, to sell over 250,000 copies. Now, today, we're going to be talking with him about his newest book, Adversaries into Allies, Win People Over Without Manipulation or Coercion. And I feel, and I believe he feels, it is by far his most important work yet, because this really, this book has so many just tremendous principles that can be followed, and most people just don't realize how powerful they can be. So today it is my absolute privilege to welcome Mr. Bob Burg to Influencers Radio. Welcome, Bob, to the show. I am just incredibly grateful for you to come on the show today.
Wow, thank you, Jack. What a great introduction, and it's really my honor. It was so great finally meeting you in person a few weeks ago.
Oh, I know it was just a great surprise and a privilege for myself as well. It was and to see you, and that's one of the things I wanted to bring up is being at an event, reading things like Go-Givers and the Adversaries into Allies without even, before we even met or spoke, to witness you actually walking and living exactly what you talk about, the inspiration, you gave a standing ovation to just about every speaker that was at this conference. I mean, you were the embodiment of what you talk about. And that's why I consider you just the influencer, that I had in mind. So.
Wow. Well, thank you. That means a lot to me. Thank you so much.
Well, let's jump right into Adversaries into Allies, because there's some really important principles and subtle principles I think a lot of people either neglect or just don't know that or they're not aware of these things that are going on. So we'll start with the title, Adversaries into Allies. At first, it's almost like the old saying, if they're not with you, they're against you, right?
Right.
And, if they don't agree with you, then they disagree with you. They're the enemy. So kind of talk about that, and let's kind of use that as a frame of what that means. Adversaries into allies, that they're one or the other, and how can you bring them over to being an ally?
That's interesting the way you put that. I have not had someone actually put it like that, but it's very interesting. And I guess with the title, it almost does sound as though they start out as your enemy, and yet someone who is a potential adversary isn't necessarily a bad person. It might just mean that because of the circumstances, they are at least temporarily standing in the way of your personal or business satisfaction. For example, the person at the customer service desk, you are returning something, and if you're like I am, you threw out the receipt or you just forgot it or something, and you're bringing something back, and there's this big sign behind the person someone saying, no return without receipt or something. And this person at the customer service desk, Jack, might be the nicest person in the world, but they haven't been taught, they haven't been equipped to know how to deal with that customer in a way that's going to bring about mutual satisfaction. So at the moment, they are in an adversarial position, or it might be the person who is your the boss at work, and you need to ask for a raise, and you might really like this boss, but this boss doesn't feel necessarily that he or she should give you a raise because you're needing the money. Okay, so there's an adversarial position, if you will, even though the person's not really an adversary. It sort of brings me back to one of my favorite quotes. This was by a man by the name of Sadaharu Oh, who's the all-time leading home run hitter ever. 858 home runs. Japanese baseball, they used to call him the Japanese Babe Ruth because he was so prolific a home run hitter. And he used to say, and I love this quote, he said, "I never looked at the opposing pitcher as my adversary, but rather as my partner in hitting home runs." And I thought the positioning of that, the reframing of that was just beautiful, because he didn't necessarily see this person as an adversary or as an enemy, but rather the person who he was going to work with in order to attain the results he wanted. Now, this doesn't mean the pitcher saw him as a partner in his hitting home runs, but he didn't have to. It was that Sadaharu Oh saw it that way. And that customer service person or the boss or the current client from whom we need to raise our fees, or let them know that they're kind of moving into scope creep a little bit in terms of what they're asking. We need to look at them as a partner, as someone we're moving from potential adversary into an ally. So we are going to attain personal satisfaction, but we're also going to help them as well.
Well, that story is, and it is a perfect example, because it really does help you understand that no matter what the situation you're in, life, business, anything, that if there's another person involved, they are a participant in the outcome of whatever's going to happen. And there's no way around that. And what you've kind of given people is the opportunity to assess that and very purposefully control that participation with that other person, so that the outcome can come out in your favor. And I know the word influence, it's kind of a ubiquitous word. It's the show, Influencers Radio. And some people think about.
I love the title of your show.
Well, that's why you're the embodiment of what the show is all about. And so influence, there's a lot of different words people interchange. And one of them is, when you influence someone, it's your ability to persuade someone. Mm-hmm. And there's a fine line, especially in the world of marketing and what we see every day, advertising, from everything from the commercials we see on TV to infomercials to the news that we watch. And there's a fine line between what people think of persuasion and manipulation. And some people don't separate those two terms. They almost use them interchangeably, that if you're persuading someone, you're manipulating them. And they obviously have two different connotations. Right. So what is it that is the big difference between persuasion and manipulation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a very, very important question. Let's begin even with the term influence itself. I mean, what is influence? Influence on a very, very basic level is simply the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, usually within the context of a specific goal. Influence is not pushing people. You don't hear people say, wow, that Jack, he is so influential. He has a lot of push. No, they'd say he has a lot of pull, because that's what influence is. Influence is it's pull. It's an attraction. Great influencers attract people to themselves and to their ideas. And again, they do this not through pushing themselves on people, pushing their ideas on others, or being push-y, but through its very opposite, pull. Now, we look at persuasion and manipulation. manipulation as forms of influence. Because let's put it this way: if influence is just a principle, and as you know, a principle or a universal law is neither good nor bad; it just is. It's how it's utilized that makes the difference. So if we look at influence as the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, one could do that two different ways. They could manipulate another person, which I believe is wrong, or they could persuade another person, which I believe is positive. So what are the differences? Well, first, we need to acknowledge that the two are certainly cousins. Why do I say that? Well, because both the manipulator and the persuader understand human nature. They understand what moves people. They understand what drives people. They understand what motivates people. Both the manipulator and the persuader can usually elicit short-term action. But that's where it ends, and I want to come back to that in a moment, because when you look at the definitions of the two, manipulation or persuasion, or the actual difference, I think it was said best in a book that I read, probably 10, 15 years ago now. It was written in 1986, called The Art of Talking So That People Will Listen by Dr. Paul W. Sweats. However, the book is really much more about listening than it was about talking. It was a brilliant book, Dr. Paul Sweats. And in this, he gave what I thought was the best explanation. He said that manipulation aims at control, not cooperation. It does not consider the good of the other party. It typically results in a win-lose situation. Now, in contrast to the manipulator, he says, the persuader seeks to enhance the self-esteem of the other party. The result is that people respond better because they're treated as responsible, or we could say response-able, self-directing individuals. So I believe that it begins with intent. See, the manipulator, while he may not necessarily want to hurt that other person, he really doesn't care if he does, as long as he gets the results he wants. He's totally win at all costs. He is totally what we call I-focused or me-focused. It's all about him. Not so with the persuader. For a persuader, the only way a persuader can feel good about the situation is if he or she has helped the other person get what they want, feel good about themselves as well. So it begins with intent, but that's not where it ends, and here's why. See, the manipulator and the persuader, again, they can both elicit immediate action, but that's where it stops, because once you know you've been manipulated, you will do your best to avoid this person, resist this person, ignore this person, not have anything to do with this person. Even if you have to work with this person or in some way be part of that person's life, you're going to do your best to resist them and not be fooled or manipulated by them. With a persuader, once you've been persuaded, you feel great about that person because that person had your best interest at heart as well. So it's not only much better life to be a persuader rather than a manipulator, it's also, it turns out, much better business.
Well, yeah, and I think that's what, one of the big things that I got early on in your book, The Adversaries into Allies, was it really did shine a light on that difference. And it almost allows you to see and catch yourself sometimes. Right. Am I doing this? What's the purpose? Am I doing this? What am I doing it to make sure that their outcome is the best for them, or is it just my outcome? And for a lot of people that really do have that at their heart, they want to do the ethical thing, they want to do the right thing. All of a sudden, there's a spotlight put on it, and they can't ignore it when they think about that. And I think that's just a tremendous way that you describe that in the book. One of the other things that you talk about in the book that is really important, because people can understand these principles in their mind, but the skills to put these into action, which really what you define as people skills, and how important people skills are. So to talk a little bit about that, about kind of define what you mean by people skills, because I know that you don't have to be this prolific, raconteur or conversationalist. People skills are something that a lot of people probably do have and can develop them. So kind of define what you mean by the people skills in order to put these principles into practice.
Sure. Well, I think, more and more people are understanding and realizing that you can have all the success elements, that look good, that sound good. You can be very talented. You can be of high character. You can be ambitious, kind, charitable, hardworking, thrifty, energetic. You can have a knack for numbers and a head for business. You can be even-tempered and creative and much more. And hey, all that's great. It's in fact terrific. However, unless again you can influence people, move people to the appropriate and the desired action, your chances for success are simply not as good and actually highly unlikely. Now, when you can utilizing, let's say, I would say a combination of benevolent intent and a learned skill set, you can actually constantly, consistently, and even predictably attain satisfaction both business-wise and personally while adding exceptional value to everyone's life you touch. Now, I call this ultimate influence, which is even a little bit more than influence. Ultimate influence I define as the ability to get the results you want with others while helping them feel genuinely good about themselves, about the situation, and about you. Now, why is that so important? Well, I think we've all known people, Jack, who had a lot of those attributes that we mentioned, a lot of those traits and characteristics, and they achieved a certain really good level of success. And yet, when it came to whether it was climbing the corporate ladder or having a small business or even just in sales, they tended to be passed right by that person who had that seeming knack, quote unquote, right, to elicit agreement from others, to just sort of have people be predisposed to be on their side. And these are the people who have developed, and like you said, some just come by it naturally, but I don't know too many, but some do certainly. But most of us, we learn it. And these are the people that have these people skills. They have that sense of emotional intelligence, if you will, as Daniel Goleman talked about so eloquently in his great books, that they understand themselves, they understand people, they have that sense of empathy, and, they're able to really connect with people in a way that very quickly elicits agreement.
I want to make sure that we don't skate over this, and I really, really want to put a spotlight on this. The term that you said, ultimate influence. All right. Cause, like I said, influence is a kind of a ubiquitous word. We use it, but ultimate influence is really something that I guess I think you coined. It's the, first time I've heard that, together in the book. And so I want you to, if you could repeat that definition of ultimate influence, because I think that really is the core formula that you're talking about. And then I want to kind of go into those 5 principles that you talk about in the book, but run back over that again, because that's definitely a rewindable there, that definition that you had of ultimate influence.
Yeah, it's really getting the results you want when you could say dealing with others or working with others, what have you, while, and this is the real key part, while helping them feel genuinely good about themselves, about the situation, and about you. Because it really, to attain instantaneous results and not have people feel good, what that does is it first of all sets it up for people to feel manipulated, to resist you in the future. Sometimes even sabotage, right now. And like with any leader, with any influence, leadership is influence. Dr. Oh goodness gracious. Yeah, I've read so many of his books, and I'm trying right now. I'm having trouble thinking of his name, and everybody knows him. The leadership speaker. Oh my gosh, who has said that leadership is influence? Dr. John Maxwell. That leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And another thing he says is influence is everything. And in this context, absolutely. And so when leaders try to influence or move others through manipulation or through compliance. And really compliance, when you think of it, it's force. It's the difference between force and power. Dr. David Hawkins wrote a wonderful book, Power versus Force, just a terrific book. And it's so true, because power is positive. Force is negative. If you have to force someone into doing something, that is absolutely the lowest form of moving another person, of influencing another person. Force is manipulation, it's control, it's cajoling, and so when the challenge with trying to lead, and this is even, let's face it, in the real world, there are people who, whether it's the supervisor, manager, or entrepreneur, maybe that person who they own the business, they have what's called positional authority. They have a title. They're positional leaders. They're not necessarily real good leaders, but they're positional leaders. But hey, the employee knows if they want any chance of advancement, a promotion, a raise, or to not be fired or just, punished or disciplined, they have to do what they're told. But the challenge with this, and this is the key point, when you try to lead or influence through compliance, whether it's a team of 1,000 or 100 or a committee of 5 or a family member or a friend or that difficult customer service person, when you try to influence through compliance, at best, that person's going to do exactly what they're told and not one bit more. Now, that's at best. At worst, they'll find a way to sabotage the process completely, consciously or unconsciously. But again, that's compliance. The opposite of compliance is commitment. When you've earned the commitment from someone, one person or a group, when you've earned that commitment, it's an entirely different story. And this commitment is practically always the result of the influencer understanding, not just at a surface level, but at a core level, a heart level, understanding what I believe was Dale Carnegie's underlying premise in his classic How to Win Friends and Influence People. And this is where he said, ultimately, people do things for their reasons, not our reasons. So the great influencer always asks themselves questions such as, how does what I'm asking this person to do align with their goals, their wants, their needs, their desires? How does what I'm asking this other person to do align with their values? And when asking ourselves these questions thoughtfully, intelligently, genuinely, authentically, again, not as a way to manipulate another human being into doing our will, but as a way to help everyone advance in the process, now we've come a lot closer to earning that commitment. And there's a huge difference, as you know, between compliance and commitment. I love what my great friend Dondi Scumaci, she's one of my great friends and mentors, and she speaks all over to the biggest companies and teams in the world on leadership and team building and influence. And I love this. Dondi says, compliance will never take you where commitment can go. And I think that's such a profound point, because great leaders, great influencers know that they accomplish great things only with others. And the best of them know that when it comes right down to it, it's never about them. Great leadership is never about the leader. Great influence is never about the influencer. And great salesmanship is never about the salesperson. It's always about the other person. It's about everyone whose lives you choose to bring value to.
And that is just a tremendous thing. And it's a personal thing. It's something that someone has to do kind of within their own personality and their own, what works for them, make it their own.
Yeah.
And
it needs to be congruent with a person's true values, core values, and feelings.
And, one of the things that, you've identified 5 principles of this, of ultimate influence that you talk about in the book, and I want to talk about each of these if we could. Mm-hmm. And the first one, I think, to me, is if someone gets this one down, they are going to be miles ahead of where they could be. And the reason that it really resonated with me so much, because I work with a lot of people that they're not salespeople, but they find themselves in a sales position, and they often want to know, what to say. And I always say, I can give you a script, but I can't give you a script to give to your prospect. That's always going to be reactionary. And the first principle that you talk about in the book is control your own emotions, right? You may not be able to control what that other person does, but you can control how you react to it. So, and I think that's extremely important. So principle number one of the ultimate influence is control your own emotions. And so what exactly do you mean by this in this context?
Sure. Well, this is really where it all begins, because it's only when you can control your own emotions, only when you can control yourself, when you're the boss of yourself, it's only then that you're in a position where you can take a potentially negative situation or person and turn it into a win for everyone involved. But we know this can be difficult. Why? Well, we're human beings. And as human beings, we are emotional beings. Now, we like to think that we're logical. And to a certain extent, of course, we certainly are. But we are pretty emotion-driven. As human beings, we make major decisions based on emotion, and we back up those decisions with logic. We rationalize, which if you break up the word rationalize, it simply means we tell ourselves rational lies. And we do this in order to justify the emotional decision that we really wanted to make, even though we knew it wasn't the right one. This is being human, okay? And which doesn't mean we have to accept that. That's why we talk about controlling our emotions. But there's also the type of emotion in which we allow someone to say or do something that consciously or unconsciously pushes our buttons, causes us to feel. And remember, nobody can make you mad or sad or angry, but they can push your buttons. And we ourselves, like you said, you can't give them a script. We can only control ourselves, but we can allow ourselves to feel bad or feel depressed or feel put out or feel angry. And when we do that, when we've allowed our emotions to control us like this, Jack, we're not only not part of the solution, we're actually part of the problem. And we're not in a position to turn this into any kind of a win-win. So the first thing is we've got to understand why this is so important that we are in control of ourselves, in control of our emotions, which is not to in any way imply that we should rid ourselves of our emotions or be emotionless robots. Not at all. Emotions are a great part of life. They bring meaning. They bring us joy and pleasure, by all means. But we just need to be the ones. We need to be in control of our emotions rather than our emotions being in control of us. Referring back again to my good friend Dondi Scubacci, I quoted her in the book as saying, by all means, take your emotions along for the ride, but make sure you are driving the car. And that's the key. By all means, allow your emotions to be a part of your life, but they cannot be calling the shots. You've got to be. I'm reading a book. I just actually finished reading a book right now. One of my new favorite books. It was written by John A. Allison, called The Leadership Crisis and the Free Market Cure. And I love what he wrote. He wrote, emotions are not a valid means of knowledge. That's so brilliant. Emotions are not a valid means of knowledge, and yet we know people make so many decisions emotionally. And he says, well, so how do we make sure we don't make counterproductive decisions based on this? And what he says is the goal should be to train your emotions so they automatically support the conclusions that your rational mind determined. And so what we really do need to train ourselves, train our emotions to be our support rather than our boss.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's clear that throughout, just about everyone can look back and see that, emotional decision making has probably been an impediment to progress in some form or fashion in their life. And that kind of leads into the principle number 2 is, once you can control your emotions, the other thing is we live in a world of diversity and understand that there are so many different belief systems that we can encounter on so many levels, and to be cognizant of that and understand that it's kind of inevitable that there's going to be a clash of belief systems, which go back to using principle number 1 to control your emotions on that. So what do you mean by belief systems when it comes to applying the principles of ultimate influence? Because that is your principle number 2 is understand the clash of belief systems.
Right. Well, what is a belief? Well, a belief is simply a subjective truth. In other words, it's the truth as you or as I understand the truth to be, which doesn't mean it's the truth. It simply means it's our truth. Now, there are times when our truth and the truth is the same, but many times it's not the same, and yet we think it is. And our belief system is really, it's a combination of upbringing, environment, schooling, news media, television shows, movies, popular culture, cultural mores, everything we touch, taste, hear, see, smell, everything, every experience we ever have adds to our belief system. The interesting thing, though, Jack, is that it tends to be formed pretty much by the time we're little more than toddlers, and from that point on, every new experience that comes in simply gets added upon the basic premise that's already there. So we grow up and live our lives saying, thinking, feeling, doing things based on what I call an unconscious operating system. It's programming that we didn't have anything to do with consciously accepting. Okay, it was given to us, and that's how we live our lives, and we don't even know this. We're not. Most of us are not even aware of it. And even when we are aware of it, it's still difficult to consciously remember. So we're basically driven by these beliefs that we had nothing to do in forming, and this other person with whom we're about to have a somewhat challenging, potentially adversarial conversation or relationship, they come from their own unconscious operating system, their belief system, and they're not aware of it. So you can see right there where that clash could come. Now, the key is not necessarily to understand their belief system, because, hey, they probably don't understand their belief system. But what we need to do is simply understand, this is the key, to understand that they most likely see the world from a different view, okay, from a different belief system, if you will. And as long as we understand that and respect that, now we can create the environment for a win-win to take place. But this belief system is absolutely, understanding this is absolutely key to your peace of mind, to your happiness, to your effectiveness. Don Miguel Ruiz just talks about it so eloquently in his classic, The Four Agreements, when he talks about don't make assumptions and don't take things personally. Why not? Because it probably has nothing to do with us. They live their lives their way. They come from a different set of beliefs than we do, and. Now, here's an interesting thing, if I may. As human beings, we tend to not know this, right? We tend to think that most people see the world. In fact, we tend to think everyone sees the world basically the same way we do. How could it be any different? It's all we know. And this is why you often hear people say things like, oh, nobody likes that, or everybody feels that way. Or maybe you've said, I know I've said this, I would never treat someone like that. No, we wouldn't, because it's not congruent with our unconscious belief system, but others would because it is congruent with theirs. So, once we understand this, now we can feel a lot better about pretty much everything because it really isn't personal. But we do need to understand consciously that there are two different dynamics at work.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that I really got out of that was when you talk about understand, and not for people to think that this means that you need to go and join into their belief system or make them feel that you have the same beliefs in it. But it's almost like you have two different compasses that are set differently. And it's not that you have to start using their compass, but it's just that the fact that you understand that they have one that is set differently puts gives you a huge advantage in the ultimate influence. So I think
we don't
that's
have to
important.
agree with their belief. We just have to understand that it's there. That it's reality to them. Yeah,
and I think that right there was just a huge, the thought that came over me that most people think, well, you have to understand, you have to, think about what you do talk about in principle number 5. We'll get to that about, the empathy, but it's not that you have to join in and join into their belief system.
Exactly.
Principle number 3, to me, I feel is probably one of the most pivotal points in your opportunity to bring somebody from adversary to ally. Mm-hmm. And that's because it's acknowledging, and that's another very important word, acknowledging their ego. Right. And so it's not necessarily that you're pandering to them or stroking their ego, but what does that mean, acknowledging their ego? Because this really is a pivotal point in bringing them over to your side. So, what is the difference between acknowledging their ego versus, pandering to them or just stroking that ego?
Yeah, and it is important because, that we know the ego is a main driver for most people. I often say when I'm speaking to an audience, why do I say acknowledge their ego and not ours? Well, because none of us in this room have an ego, and everybody laughs because, no, we know we all do. And that's okay. When you think of it, literally, what is the ego? It's the I. That's all it is. It's that sense of ourselves that understands that we are a unique human being, that we're actually separate from all other things and people. Now, this can be a little politically incorrect to say, Jack, to say that we're separate from others, because we as society gets more and more collectivist in a sense. But hey, let's put it this way. We learned from Napoleon Hill and Think and Grow Rich and about the universal consciousness, the mastermind. Certainly, quantum physics has showed that vibrations, that the atoms, they vibrate in harmony with one another. There's the unified field. And I agree with all of those. And yet, as human beings, in our human experience, we are separate, unique individuals. We all have our own sense of purpose. We value happiness differently. We seek happiness in our own individual ways. All that's okay. And when our ego is much like emotions, when we control our ego, we can use that to accomplish great things, both for ourselves and for society as a whole. It's when the ego gets away from us and controls us that we can get into trouble. Now, when I say acknowledge the other person's ego, I certainly don't mean acknowledge it like saying, hey, buddy, your ego. That's going to probably have the opposite effect of what you want. But what I do mean is to acknowledge that if this person is acting in a way that is not only not productive, but counterproductive, if they're saying or doing things that really don't make logical sense and they seem to be, run by this or their emotions, there's a good chance their ego has now taken control of them. And if we're going to obtain the results we want, we must acknowledge that this is the case. And we must be able to work with this person, and that is where tact and empathy, and that is where reframing and some of the things we'll talk about, because these 5 principles work together. And so it's not a matter of being phony or being false, but it is a matter of understanding that about 95% of moving a person to your side of the table, someone who is maybe predisposed not to be there is really about how you make them feel about themselves and how you make them feel about you. Because if they don't feel good about themselves and they don't feel good about you, their ego is going to take them in the wrong direction. And again, we can say, well, should it be that way or shouldn't it? Well, it just is. And what people who are successful do is they understand that human nature simply is, just like gravity is. And that we have to work within that in order to be successful. Fortunately, when we acknowledge a person's ego in our dealings with them, we can do it very genuinely and very authentically.
Yeah, and the way that you describe that, and it's something that most people, they think of it as a thought of, well, that's great to do it, but how do you actually do it in the proper way? And mm-hmm. by doing that, it's incredible to see that even with your family, to mm-hmm. be able to put that into place and you see the difference. Your principle number 4 is about framing. And I know there's a lot of people that are now aware of framing. And if you're not aware of framing, I guess you have to understand that there is always a frame that's set. And right. if you're in a situation, one-on-one with something, one of you has set the frame, whether accidentally or purposefully. Mm-hmm. But there is a frame. So talk about that. Kind of explain what a frame is sure. to folks that may not know, and about how you can set the proper frame for ultimate influence.
Sure. A frame can be defined as the foundation from which everything else takes place. Let me give you an example, if I may. I was at a Dunkin' Donuts store, and there was a little boy, probably I'd say 2.5, 3 years old, and he was kind of running around the Dunkin' Donuts while his parents were at a table, drinking coffee, and he began to walk toward them. Now, as he did, he slipped on the floor. He took a spill on the floor. He fell, and he didn't fall hard, and I really don't think he hurt himself, but you could tell by the expression on his face that he was shocked. He intuitively knew that was not supposed to happen. So he immediately looked at, his mom and dad, the people he trusted most, for their interpretation of the event. Now, what happened. He slipped, he fell on the floor. What he wanted to know is, okay, mom and dad, what takes place next here? What's the next thing going on? Well, I really believe that had his parents gotten upset and panicky and, oh no, are you all right? I think he would have started to cry, because it looked like he was going to go, he could go either way with that. But what they did is they handled it just beautifully. They smiled and they clapped and they said, oh, what a good trick. That looked like so much fun. And immediately he began to laugh. Now, what the parents did, Jack, is they set a productive frame from which he could operate. And this is the key. And this is what we want to do whenever we first meet someone. We want to set the proper frame. We want to set the frame of win-win. We want to set the frame of friendship. We want to set the frame of allies. And it can be as simple as the way you smile. By the way, very important, is to be able to reset someone else's already negative frame. Example from the book, and I'll edit the story just for time, but the manager came out because there was an issue, and the manager comes out looking, expecting that there's going to be an argument, because most customers argue with him, and so he kind of has his game face on. He's ready to be, officially polite, but quote the rule book and not get you what you really need. But when he comes out in that negative frame, he sees you, rather than being ready to be argumentative and so forth and so on, he sees you have a smile on your face, your hand is outstretched, you take a step toward him and you say, hi, Mr. Jones, Bob Burg, thank you so much for taking a moment of your time to see me. I know you're very busy. Boom. You have now just totally reset the frame. Okay, the entire premise from which he could operate. So now you become that customer, different from all the other customers he has to deal with all day long. You become the customer who he wants to please.
And what's really interesting with that is, and I've used that about 3 times. Not that I was ever argumentative with people, but I purposefully used that. And before I did it, I was hesitant, thinking that, does this mean I'm putting myself or I'm putting them in the alpha position? Does this mean that I'm cowering to them by doing this? And, remarkably, every single time, it worked out much better than I had expected, and I didn't feel that I was, putting myself in the secondary. But that's kind of what I thought about, hesitant, especially when I heard that story about, you're really, and what you're doing is actually kind of applying almost all those principles together in a couple of sentences.
Oh, absolutely, and you'll find that naturally that happens. And that's why in the book, after the first chapter where we kind of explain the principles, the 5 principles, the rest of the book is just really short stories. Some of them are half a page or 1 page or, 2 or 3 pages, because it's really just a matter of, once you understand the principles, just providing the reader with all the different types of scenarios that could ever come up and just equipping with the right, wording or phrasing or so forth. So it's actually very intuitive throughout. And you're absolutely right. There are times that you use all 5 of those, but it's so natural, it's not something you have to think about.
Yeah, and it also takes care of that problem. There's so many people that are looking almost for that script to give to the other person. What this book does is it allows you to react to whatever, how they are approaching the situation, and it lets you adjust to where you really are control, because you're in control of how you react to it.
Exactly.
And a big part of that is principle number 5, in the way that you communicate. And the way you communicate may change a little bit, depending on the situations like you talked about, but just about all the time, if you really strip it down to the core, you're certainly doing it with purpose, tact, and a big one is from, empathy. As a standpoint of empathy, which I think is probably the core of why that works so well.
Yeah, well, law number 5 ties it all, or principle number 5 ties it together, which is communicate with tact and empathy. And it reminds me of a great book I read many years ago, one of my favorites, called How to Have Confidence and Power in Dealing with People, by Les Giblin. And what Mr. Giblin wrote was, the key is, or he said, what's important is attaining satisfaction without trampling upon the egos of those we deal with. So we see right out the bat that it has so much to do with ego, and ego with emotion and so forth and so on. But so let's talk about tact. Well, my dad has always defined tact as the language of strength. And when I think of tact, I think of being able to teach, being able to correct someone, if you will, to be able to critique someone, to be able to constructively criticize someone. Now, do we ever want to do any of those? Of course not. Absolutely not. But we're talking about the real world, not a fantasy world. And there are times we need to be able to teach that person, but we need to do it in a way that not only is this person not defensive of us and resistant then to our ideas, but they're open to us and they're accepting of our ideas. And this is what tact allows a person to do. Empathy, which really is just defined as the vicarious, the identification with or vicarious experiencing of another's feelings, simply means that you're communicating to this person that, hey, that while you may or may not understand exactly how they feel, because you might not, remember, we come from different belief systems, and you might not understand exactly how they feel, but you can communicate that you understand they're feeling something, and that this something is distressful to them, and that you are there to help them through that. And so often people just want to know that, another person identifies with them, that you do understand that they're feeling some kind of pain.
Yeah. And I think, so some of the examples are not just in big business or negotiations of huge deals. It works right down to, you talk about getting out of a traffic ticket. right? That tact and empathy is what, if you've ever gotten out of a traffic ticket, even if you did it by accident, that's probably what got you out of it, right?
Yeah, you may have done it. You may have done it, intuitively and not even knowing. But when and people often ask me about that, about the getting out of the traffic ticket. It's a good question, and it turns out that all 5 of these principles do come into play when you. Now, by the way, when this will work most of the time, and it will do so when you're going, a little heavy on the pedal, not public enemy number 1, of course, going, 110 in a 20 mile an hour zone. It's not going to work then. But if you're going a little over the speed limit, not, again, probably ticket worthy, but not the worst thing in the world, or you didn't come to that complete stop, there's a good chance this will work. Of course, if you're inebriated or what have you, it's not going to, nor should it. But if it ever does happen, what you want to do is as soon as you see the flashing blues in the mirror or you hear the siren, you want to pull over where it's safe and come to a complete stop, shut off the car. And then here's the important thing: if it's at night, you want to put the overhead light on, put the inside car light on, and put your hands on the 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock positions of the wheel and stay absolutely still while the officer approaches the car. What you've done is you first of all, just understand that the most dangerous time in a police officer's job is when they're approaching the driver's side of a car that they've pulled over, because they don't know who this person is or what this person's up to or and so forth. So you've just right there shown utmost respect for them. You have empathized with them. You've let them know that you understand that while they're out protecting and serving, they are putting their lives on the line. So that's the first part. And I actually learned that from a former state trooper. Now the next part, and this is where we take the other principles, is when the officer says, do you realize you were going X miles an hour in a so-and-so zone, is you simply acknowledge that, and you say, yes, I certainly do. I apologize. I didn't realize it until I heard the siren. I looked down, and absolutely, I was going that speed. And so what you've done here is you've been honest with them, which most people aren't. They've heard every lie in the book. They don't believe any of them. And so what you've done is you've been truthful and respectful. Now, by the way, all of this right here that you've just done might be enough for the officer to tell you that he or she is letting you off with a warning. But let's say you feel the need to continue and you need to judge this yourself. Then what you might say is, officer, again, I take full responsibility. I was absolutely in the wrong. It's not something I usually do, and I'm wondering if it would be possible or if it would be appropriate if I could possibly get away with just a warning this time. Again, you've responded, you've been in control of your emotions, you're understanding that, as a police officer, they have a certain set of beliefs, you have acknowledged their ego, you've set the frame and continued to set the frame of allies as opposed to adversaries, and of course you're speaking very tactfully, and what you did is you said, again, you took responsibility, and then you said, if it would be appropriate, if I could possibly, those words you're using are what I call the out or back door. Rather than trying to put this person into a corner where they can't really escape other than by attacking you, you've given them the out. You've made them comfortable. Burg's law of the out says the bigger the out or back door you give someone to take, the less they'll feel the need to take it. Okay, so this officer is not feeling pressured by you or coerced by you. Instead, you've shown ultimate respect. Now, if you feel you still need to take this a little further, you'd use what I call the 8 key words that will practically always move someone to your side of the issue, and that is, if you can't do it, I'll definitely understand. If you can't do it, I'll definitely understand. Again, you're total respect. You're letting this person know that it is in their court, that they are in control. You've again given them the out, so you've taken all the pressure off them. And then what you follow up with is, if you could, I'd certainly appreciate it. Okay, and that's it. And at that point, the chances are excellent that you will get out of the ticket. Not always, but usually. And you've basically used all 5 of the principles.
In that story, it wraps this up, because it makes perfect sense of why that would work. And, I've seen it in action work. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I think why that's a great example of a story is it's kind of goes against conventional thinking that people have about influencing and persuading people, as they feel that that there's an element of confidence, or there's they need to, when they frame, they need to position themselves as the dominant party in that frame. And it makes me think of one of the things that you brought up that does go against conventional thinking, is that you say, let them see you sweat. And a lot of people think that, well, no, that's, you never let them see you sweat is what you have to do. So,
well, that was a famous commercial.
Yeah. So by letting them see you sweat, and I think that story is a great example of that. But how does that work in your favor by not taking that dominant position, by stepping back and putting the control to them?
Right. And of course, there's a context and time and place for everything.
Oh, sure.
So, I mean, there are times, depending upon where you are, the not letting them see you sweat might be the absolute best advice. but typically 99 times out of 100, the more human and humble you come across, the greater the chances are that person's going to want to work with you. Adam Grant, in his best-selling book, Give and Take, cited a number of studies where, the people who came in and acted the most cocky and arrogant, people were much less inclined to be on their side and want them to succeed. But the person who was humble, the person who was, who, if there was a problem, they let them know or something, that person was usually the one people got behind. Now, there's an asterisk to that too. Dr. Grant pointed out that you also have to be able to communicate that you have expertise and knowledge. It's not like, you can just act, wimpy or something, and all of a sudden people are going to, want to. No, it's a combination of, and when we talked to this police officer, we never came across wimpy in any way. We were confident, but we were humble as we were doing it. I cited the story in the book about my fourth grade teacher who came into class and faced a bunch of, fourth graders, and we were all waiting for her to speak, and the first thing she said, and her name was Miss Cadlick, and the first thing she said was, class, I just want to tell you, I'm 22 years old. I just graduated from college. You are my very first class, and I'm scared to death right now. And we just, first of all, we couldn't believe when we got over our shock that an adult would be scared of us, especially a teacher. Immediately, we just wanted to emotionally embrace her, right? Become part of her world and let her into ours. And then she was a delight. She was an angel. But what she did is she intuitively, she let us see her sweat. She let us know she was scared, that she wanted our help. And, again, it worked out well, and it usually does. Again, there are other times where, depending upon who the people are you're facing, you can't let them see your sweat. But, most of the time, just be real and be yourself and let your foils show a little bit, and it's going to work out much better.
Well, Bob, I got to say, one of the true joys of your books and learning from you is, one, you get out there, like in Adversaries, you get out there and you put those principles right up front. Okay, like here's the principles of how this is going to work. And then you just so beautifully tell stories that are examples, so people can, almost as if they're putting them into action right there by looking at your examples and listening. And I got to say, I do have the audio version of your book, and you want to talk, I highly recommend anyone, especially after listening to you today, that it's something that certainly is very pleasant to listen to, and listen to the stories, because it really is an educational experience to not just say, well, okay, here's the 5 principles, go to it, but here's the 5 principles, and then the stories are just beautifully intertwined, those principles, and you can almost identify as you're listening to the stories how they're coming into play. So let's let people know how they can find the book, how they can get the book Adversaries into Allies, because it's something that I think it really is, to me, definitely, I think one of your most important works, and as influential as the Go Givers, with the referrals. this one right here is something that I think can truly change the course of a person's success and the way that they deal with people, not just on a business sense, but in their personal lives and the relationships that can change so much of the outcome and their success in those. So what's the best way for them to find out more and to get a copy of the book?
Sure, and it just makes me feel so great to hear you say that. Thank you. I really appreciate that. The best thing for people to do really is just to go to my website, which is Burg, BURG.com. And while they're there, they can subscribe if they'd like to my influence and success insights. They can get chapter 1 of The Go-Giver, and they can also take an assessment of their level of influence right now. And they can also download chapter 1 of The Go-Giver if they'd like as well. While they're there, if they would like, they can connect with me on social media. They can visit our Go-Givers International membership site and just have a lot of fun. So Burg.com, BURG.
Yeah, I highly recommend that. Go-Givers, and if you don't have a copy of Go-Givers on your bookshelf, shame on you. It's something that it is a must in my book, and I think you're going to find the same for Adversaries into Allies. Bob, I want to thank you so much. This has really, really meant a lot to me, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for some time. So thank you for coming on and sharing so much with us today.
Well, my pleasure, and it was so great again to meet you and Brian. Seeing you guys on stage, and you just dazzled the audience. We just all loved you and did such a fantastic job, and getting a chance to get to know you both over the next couple of days. So thank you so much for all you do, and thank you for having me on your show.
Well, thank you. There you go, folks. Definitely check it out, Burg.com, and subscribe, get the book. There is absolutely nothing but positive things that are going to happen when you let Bob Burg influence you, and you'll see definitely why I feel he is the definition of influencer as I imagined it for Influencers Radio. So until next time, remember, you are the only real game changer.
You've been listening to Influencers Radio. To get all past shows and updates on future shows, visit influencersradio.com today or follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/influencersradio.